What's sad about that is that the Western intellectuals cannot accept the reality that 200 years of Western domination of world history is over. Is over.
What power with great power pretensions adopts wolf warrior diplomacy, and why? What's going on here? How is that in the advantage of anybody, much less China?
12% of the world's population lives in the West, and 88% of the world's population lives outside the West. And let me make one point very clearly and very boldly at the very beginning. How the 12% views China is not how the 88% views China.
So I think whether we like it or not, we have to pay attention to the points that Orville Schell makes, because he speaks, what he speaks represents the views of many Americans. And at the same time, I think the views of Mr. Schell and people like him in the United States surprisingly also show a deep ignorance of China. And I say surprising because certainly in the case of Mr. Orville Schell, he's a very good scholar. He's written lots of books, and he cannot say that he's not knowledgeable about China. He is very knowledgeable about China, certainly Chinese history. But I suspect that his portrayal of contemporary China tends to be distorted by Western perspectives. And to explain what I mean by that, the West continues to believe that there's only one way for societies to develop, that they all have to become carbon copies of Western liberal democratic societies. And of course, this is not a secret because, as you know, Francis Fukuyama said this in his famous essay, The End of History, and his essay was accepted by all Western intellectuals, and they all thought all societies must conform and become like Western liberal democratic societies. And what's sad about that is that the Western intellectuals cannot accept the reality that 200 years of Western domination of world history is over. Is over. And now you're not going to live in a world which doesn't just have one successful civilization, Western civilization, as we had in the 19th century and 20th century. In the 21st century, there'll be many successful civilizations, and many Asian civilizations will come back. And certainly these civilizations, whether Indian or Islamic or Chinese, will grow and change and develop on the basis of modern influences, on the basis of new influences from outside, but also on the basis of their own historical and cultural traditions. Certainly in China, with a 4,000, 5,000 year history, is not going to become a carbon copy or a replica of a Western liberal society. Why should it? It should develop according to the basis of its own culture and history and tradition. But a simple idea like this alone is unacceptable to Western intellectuals. And it shows that Western intellectuals, even though they claim that they have liberal, open minds, in reality, they actually have closed minds because they can only see everything within a small Western box. And what is not inside the Western box, they cannot see, which is stunning. And I say this as someone who spent all my life studying Western thought, Western culture, and I always thought that the Western tradition should be one of having open minds to new possibilities. But certainly when it comes to China, the Western mind has become closed. And sadly, I don't see it opening up in the near future. I wish I had some good news for you. Unfortunately, on U.S. China relations, I have no good news for you. I only have bad news for you that most Western policymakers share the same narrow, jaundiced view of China. And indeed, many of the policymakers actually have harsher views on China. I mean, as you know, there was recently an article in the magazine Foreign Affairs by two people who had relatively senior roles. Matt Pottinger, who was a senior official on China in the Trump administration, Mike Gallagher, a congressman who was chairman of the Committee on Strategic Competition between the United States and the Communist Party of China. And these are very senior people, but they have come out with an article in the magazine Foreign Affairs saying that no, you mustn't just certainly mustn't focus on engagement with China. You must focus not just on competition with China, you must focus on defeating China. That's what they're saying. So, I mean, in so doing, they were clearly showing their very negative attitude. And of course, attitudes like theirs trouble not just people in China, but trouble people certainly in the rest of the world, in Southeast Asia, who are asking, how does that help the United States? What are you trying to do by defeating China? You know, it doesn't make sense. And so it's very important that the rest of the world now must speak out in a much louder and a much clearer fashion to say to U.S. and China that, hey, before you engage in a big contest, please consider the implications for the rest of the world. It's not going to be just disruptive for Americans and Chinese. It's going to be disruptive also for countries of Southeast Asia, for example. So we in Southeast Asia should speak out more loudly and say, hey, please reconsider what you're doing. So far, these voices have not been loud enough, but I hope that in my case, by speaking out, I'll encourage others to speak out and therefore hopefully create a more tenable situation for the rest of for the other countries in the world. And so my goal, therefore, is to try and help the West out by trying to explain to them that they completely misunderstand China. As you know, the biggest insight that Henry Kissinger gave to me after a one-on-one lunch I had with him in March 2018 was that the United States doesn't have a grand strategy. In fact, has not worked out any kind of comprehensive strategy before launching its geopolitical contests against China. That's clearly very unwise. And by the way, Henry Kissinger has also emphasized, both to me and in his book on China, that by contrast, China does have a long-term strategy. But if you also want proof that the United States doesn't have a strategy, all you have to do is ask the question, which I keep asking. Before you can formulate a strategy, you must first of all say, what is your goal? What is the goal of your strategy? Is your goal to stop the economic growth of China? It cannot be done. Is your goal to overthrow the Communist Party of China? It cannot be done. Is your goal, for example, to isolate China? It cannot be done. In fact, China does more trade with the rest of the world than the United States does. And so the United States should ask itself, what is a realistic goal when it comes to dealing with China? And these are the sort of hard questions that great strategic minds like Henry Kissinger would ask, which unfortunately very few or almost no one in the United States is asking, because the United States no longer has great strategic minds like Henry Kissinger, sadly.